Nature holds no pity for a broken heart or a starving child in the Bitterroot Mountains. Desperate to keep his family alive, Jedediah McCall needed to hire a cook. Instead, he ended up with a fugitive, a woman whose deadly secrets would either save his family or slaughter them. The winter of 1883 did not arrive quietly in the Montana Territory. It descended like a roaring beast, burying the pines in heavy, suffocating white. For Jedediah McCall, the cold outside was nothing compared to the ice that had settled in his chest. 6 months prior, a sudden bout of winter fever had taken his wife, Margaret. She had been the heart of their isolated homestead, the warmth that kept the brutal reality of mountain living at bay. When she died, the warmth died with her. Jedediah was a mountain man in the truest sense. He stood 6'3", built like a split-oak barrel with a thick beard and eyes the color of a stormy sky. He could track a cougar through bare rock, bring down an elk at 300 yards, and survive a blizzard wrapped only in buffalo hide. But staring down his 2 children, 12-year-old Sarah, whose eyes held a bitter, accusatory grief, and 5-year-old Toby, who had stopped speaking the day they buried his mother, Jedediah was entirely hopelessly out of his depth. The cabin was falling into ruin. The smell of scorched cornmeal and cured pelts hung heavy in the air. The children's clothes were unwashed and threadbare, their faces perpetually smudged with soot. Jedediah tried. He truly did. But a man cannot run a trap line spanning 40 miles and simultaneously keep the hearth fires burning. When he returned from a 3-day hunt to find the fire dead and Toby shivering under a pile of filthy blankets, while Sarah wept in frustration over a spilled bucket of frozen water, Jedediah knew he was failing them. He had to swallow his pride. The next morning, he rode down into the valley settlement of Missoula. He marched into Hiram Davis's mercantile, ignoring the side-eyes from the townsfolk, who viewed the towering mountain man as a half-wild curiosity. He pinned a hastily scribbled note to the community board, "Wanted. Cook and caretaker for an isolated cabin. No questions asked. Room board and $12 a month. Inquire at McCall's Ridge." He didn't expect much. No respectable woman would willingly travel a dozen miles up into the jagged wilderness to live with a brooding widower and 2 grieving children. But desperation breeds strange company. 3 days later, a hired wagon brought her up the winding, rutted trail. Jedediah stepped out onto the porch, his Winchester resting casually in the crook of his arm, his eyes narrowed against the glaring snow. The woman who climbed down from the wagon was not the sturdy, apple-cheeked widow he had envisioned. She was slight, wrapped in a woolen coat, 2 sizes too large, shivering violently against the mountain chill. She carried a single, battered leather valise. "You McCall?" she asked. Her voice was surprisingly steady, a low melodic drawl that carried a hint of southern dust. "I am," Jedediah grunted. "You the one answering the ad?" "I am. The name is Cora Higgins." She stepped closer, and Jedediah got a better look at her. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair hastily pinned up and eyes the color of burnt molasses. But what caught Jedediah's attention wasn't her striking features. It was the faded yellowish bruise blooming along her left cheekbone and the frantic, darting way she scanned the tree line as if expecting the shadows to lunge at her. Her hands, clutched tightly around the handle of her valise, were raw and blistered, but not from the kind of domestic work he was used to seeing. "You don't look like a mountain cook, Miss Higgins," Jedediah said bluntly. "Your ad said, 'No questions asked.' Mr. McCall?" Cora shot back her chin, lifting in defiance. "I need a place to stay, where people don't come knocking. You need someone to put hot food in your children's bellies. I can cook, I can clean, and I keep to myself. Do we have a bargain, or should I tell the driver to turn back?" Jedediah studied her for a long moment. There was a desperate fire in her eyes, a survival instinct he recognized because he possessed it himself. He nodded slowly. "Cabin's this way. The boy is Toby. The girl is Sarah. Don't expect a warm welcome." The transition was anything but smooth. Sarah was hostile from the very first hour. When Cora set a plate of perfectly roasted venison and hot ash cakes on the table that evening, the first real edible meal the cabin had seen in half a year, Sarah pushed it away. "You aren't my mother." The young girl spat, her eyes welling with tears. "I don't want your food." Cora didn't flinch, didn't offer a platitude or a scolding. She simply looked at the girl with a quiet, solemn understanding. "I know I'm not Sarah, but starvation won't bring her back, and your mother wouldn't want you going to sleep with an aching belly. Eat or don't. But the plate stays there." Little Toby, however, was won over instantly. He devoured his meal and for the first time in months reached out, tentatively grabbing a fistful of Cora's skirt as she cleared the table. Jedediah watched from the corner, silently smoking his pipe. He noticed the way Cora's hand trembled slightly as she gently patted the boy's head, the way her eyes darted to the windows whenever the wind rattled the panes. That night, as Jedediah lay awake in his partitioned room, he listened to the unfamiliar sounds of someone else moving about his cabin. He heard Cora banking the fire, her soft footsteps, and then a sound that made his blood run cold, the distinct metallic click-clack of a Colt revolver cylinder being checked and locked into place. Cora Higgins was running from something, and whatever it was, she fully expected it to follow her up the mountain. As the weeks bled into the deep freeze of January, the atmosphere inside the McCall cabin underwent a profound transformation. The pervasive scent of damp wool and decay was replaced by the aroma of baking sourdough, simmering bone broth, and dried sage. The floors were swept, the children's clothes were mended, and the fire never died out. Cora was a relentless worker. She woke before dawn, chopped her own kindling if Jedediah hadn't left enough, and moved with a quiet efficiency that demanded respect. Slowly, painfully, the ice around Sarah began to thaw. It started with small things, Cora teaching her how to braid sweetgrass, or showing her the proper way to knead dough so it wouldn't turn out like hardtack. Cora never forced the issue, never demanded affection, and that gave Sarah the space she needed to grieve. But it was Jedediah who found himself struggling the most. He was a man fiercely loyal to the memory of his dead wife, yet he couldn't deny the effect Cora was having on his household and on him. He found his gaze lingering on the curve of her neck as she stirred the stew pot, or the soft, unguarded smile that graced her lips when she played with Toby by the hearth. There was a profound, quiet strength in her that drew him in. But there was also a wall, a high, impenetrable barrier that she kept carefully maintained between them. The turning point came on a brittle, freezing afternoon in late February. Jedediah was miles away, checking his traps near the frozen creek. Cora was hanging washed linens on a line, strung across the porch, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Sarah had gone out to the barn to fetch firewood, while Toby played in the snow near the tree line. A sudden sharp scream shattered the silence. Cora dropped the wet linen and spun around. Near the edge of the woods, a massive, gaunt timber wolf had emerged from the brush. Driven mad by winter starvation, it was stalking toward Toby, its yellow eyes locked on the small boy. Sarah had frozen halfway between the barn and the cabin, screaming her brother's name, but too paralyzed by fear to move. Cora didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She vaulted over the porch railing, her boots plunging into the knee-deep snow. As she ran, she reached under her heavy apron. By the time the wolf coiled its hind legs to spring, Cora had drawn a heavy-caliber revolver from a hidden holster. She didn't stop, didn't plant her feet to aim. She fired on the run. The crack of the gunshot echoed off the mountain walls like thunder. The wolf yelped its shoulder, exploding in a spray of red, and tumbled sideways into a snowbank. It scrambled frantically to its feet, limping heavily as it bolted back into the dense timber. Cora didn't lower the gun until the woods were dead silent again. She rushed to Toby, scooping him up into her arms, burying his face in her shoulder as she scanned the tree line for the rest of the pack. Sarah ran to them, throwing her arms around Cora's waist, sobbing uncontrollably. "I've got you," Cora whispered fiercely, holding both children tightly. "I've got you. Nobody is going to hurt you." When Jedediah returned an hour later, drawn by the sound of the gunshot, he found the bloody snow, the tracks, and his children, sitting by the fire, shaken but unharmed. Cora was standing by the window, her back straight, staring out into the darkening woods. "Sarah told me what happened," Jedediah said quietly, stepping up behind her. He noticed the revolver sitting on the table, a custom-engraved Smith & Wesson Schofield, an expensive, deadly weapon. "That was a hell of a shot, Cora. A shot a trained gunfighter would be proud of." Cora didn't turn around. "You learn to shoot when you have to, Mr. McCall. A cook from the flats doesn't carry a Schofield under her apron." Jedediah pressed his voice, a low rumble. He stepped closer, close enough to smell the lye soap and fear on her. "You saved my boy today. I owe you my life for that. But I won't have a war brought to my doorstep without knowing who the enemy is. Who taught you to shoot like that? Who put that bruise on your face?" Cora finally turned to face him. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears, but her jaw was set like granite. "The same man who taught me to shoot is the same man who gave me the bruise. And if he finds me, Jedediah, he won't just kill me. He'll burn this cabin to the ground with everyone inside." Before Jedediah could demand a name, a heavy knock echoed against the thick oak of the cabin door. Both of them froze. Visitors in the dead of winter were virtually unheard of. Jedediah grabbed his Winchester, motioning for Cora to take the children into the back room. He cocked the lever, chambering around, and pulled the door open. Standing on the porch was Hiram Davis, the mercantile owner from town, wrapped in heavy furs and looking utterly exhausted from the ride up the mountain. Behind him stood a stranger, a man wearing a long canvas duster, despite the cold, a silver badge pinned to his lapel, and a cold, dead-eyed stare. "Sorry to intrude, Jedediah." Hiram stammered his breath, puffing in white clouds. "But this here is Deputy Marshal Vance. Deputy Marshal Holden. He rode in on the stage this morning. He's looking for a fugitive." The marshal stepped forward, holding up a wrinkled, telegraph-printed wanted poster. "Name's Holden. I'm tracking a woman. Dark hair, southern drawl. Wanted in the Texas territory for the murder of a state senator. A man who also happened to be her husband." Holden's eyes drifted past Jedediah, peering into the dim warmth of the cabin. "I have reason to believe she's hiding out up here. You wouldn't happen to have taken on any new help lately, would you?" "McCall." Jedediah's grip tightened on the rifle. He could hear Cora's shallow breathing from the back room. He looked at the poster, then at the marshal, a heavy silence falling over the frozen mountain. Jedediah stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking any view into the cabin's interior. The bitter wind whipped snow across the porch, stinging his eyes, but he didn't blink. He stared down at the wanted poster, then shifted his gaze to the cold, calculating eyes of Deputy Marshal Holden. "Murder, you say?" Jedediah's voice was a low, slow rumble, betraying absolutely nothing. "Cold-blooded, Holden replied, his hand resting casually on the butt of his sidearm. Senator Beauregard Montgomery of Texas, shot dead in his own study. The widow took his money, his prized Schofield revolver, and vanished. We tracked her as far as Bozeman before the trail went cold. But a stage driver down in Missoula mentioned a dark-haired woman heading up this ridge. Jedediah looked at Hiram, the local mercantile owner, who was shivering violently and looking everywhere but at Jedediah's face. Hiram had been pressured into guiding the lawman up here. "Hiram," Jedediah said, his tone softening just a fraction. "You know who I hired. A crusty old sourdough named Jebediah Rust. He lasted a week before the isolation got to his head. Packed up and hiked back down toward the Idaho border 4 days ago." Holden's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, peering around Jedediah's broad shoulder. "You wouldn't mind if I stepped inside to warm my bones, would you, McCall? Take a look around. It's a long ride back to town." Jedediah shifted his weight, the Winchester rifle tilting just an inch, the barrel angling subtly toward Holden's chest. "I would mind, Marshal. My wife passed not long ago. My children are grieving, and my daughter is sick with a fever. I won't have strangers tramping snow and tension into my home. You want a fire, there's a line shack 1/2 mile down the southern ridge. You're welcome to it, but you aren't coming in here." For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the howling wind. The tension was thick enough to chop with a broadaxe. Holden weighed his options. He was a dangerous man, but Jedediah McCall was a mountain on 2 legs, holding a lever-action rifle on his home turf. "Right then," Holden said, his smile failing to reach his eyes. "My mistake. If you see this woman McCall, you do well to wire the authorities. A man hiding a fugitive hangs right beside her." "I'll keep that in mind," Jedediah said. He stood motionless on the porch, watching until Holden and Hiram mounted their horses and disappeared into the swirling whiteout. When Jedediah finally closed and barred the heavy oak door, he found Cora standing in the center of the room. The children were still hidden away. She had her Schofield revolver in her hand, pointed at the floor, her knuckles white. "Why did you do that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you give me to him? You don't owe me anything, Jedediah." Jedediah set his rifle against the wall and walked slowly toward her. He gently reached out and pushed the barrel of the revolver down, taking it from her unresisting grip and laying it on the table. Because a man with a badge doesn't usually ride with his thumb resting on his hammer when he's just asking friendly questions, Jedediah said quietly. And because a lawman doesn't wear a silver badge on a canvas duster, he pins it to his vest. That man isn't a marshal, Cora. He's a bounty hunter, or worse. Now I lied for you. I put my children in danger for you. It's time you tell me the truth. Cora slumped into a heavy wooden chair, burying her face in her hands. When she looked up, the walls she had built around herself had completely crumbled. "My maiden name is Higgins," she began, her voice ragged. "But my married name is Montgomery. Beauregard Montgomery was a wealthy man, a powerful Texas senator. To the world, he was a gentleman. Behind closed doors, he was a monster." She touched the fading bruise on her cheek. "This was a parting gift. But the beatings weren't why I killed him." Jedediah pulled up a stool, his stormy eyes locked on hers, offering silent, unwavering support. "Beauregard was buying up land for the new railroad lines." Cora continued, tears spilling over her lashes. "When homesteaders refused to sell, he didn't negotiate. He sent men to burn them out. If they fought back, he had them killed. I found his ledgers, the names, the payments to hired guns. I confronted him. I told him I was going to the federal authorities." Cora took a shuddering breath. He laughed. He told me the authorities worked for him. Then he drew his gun at Schofield right there and told me I wasn't going anywhere ever again. We fought. I managed to twist the gun around. It went off. I didn't wait to see if he was dead. I took his ledgers, the cash in his safe, and I ran. Holden is one of Beauregard's fixers. He's not here to arrest me, Jedediah. He's here to recover the ledgers and put a bullet in my head. Jedediah absorbed the story in silence. The mountain code was simple. You protect your own, and you do not abide bullies. Cora had come into his home, a stranger, but she had become its heartbeat. She had brought life back to Sarah's eyes. She had brought a smile back to Toby's face. And though he had been fighting it, she had brought a fire back to Jedediah's own frozen heart. He reached out his massive rough hand, gently enveloping her small, trembling one. "Where are the ledgers now?" he asked. "Sewn into the lining of my valise," she whispered. "Good." Jedediah stood up, a dangerous primal energy radiating from him. Holden didn't buy my story. The storm is setting in, so he'll bed down in that line shack tonight. But tomorrow, when the snow clears, he'll be back. And he won't be knocking this time. Cora looked up at him, her dark eyes wide. "Jedediah, you can't fight him. I'll leave, tonight, in the dark. I can lead him away from the children. You aren't going anywhere, Cora." Jedediah said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. He pulled her to her feet, his hands resting firmly on her shoulders. "You are not a fugitive in this house. You are the woman who saved my son. You belong here. If Holden wants to bring Texas justice to Montana, he's going to find out how we handle trespassers in the Bitterroots." The storm broke just before dawn, leaving the mountain bathed in an eerie, silent blue light. Inside the cabin, the fires had been deliberately smothered to avoid casting silhouettes against the windows. The air was freezing, biting at their lungs. Jedediah had transformed the cabin into a fortress. The heavy dining table was flipped on its side, barricading the front window. Sarah and Toby were hidden beneath the floorboards in the root cellar, wrapped in thick furs. Cora crouched beside the flipped table, the Schofield heavy in her hands, alongside a double-barreled shotgun Jedediah had loaded with buckshot. "They won't come straight up the trail," Jedediah murmured, peering through a small crack in the heavy wooden shutters. He was armed with his Winchester and a heavy hunting knife strapped to his thigh. "Holden will flank us. He'll send his muscle to the back door, and he'll take the front." "How do you know he has men with him?" Cora asked, her breath misting in the cold air. "A man like Holden never hunts a wolf alone," Jedediah replied grimly. Suddenly the horses in the barn let out a frantic whinny. "Here they come," Jedediah hissed. The crunch of snow boots echoed faintly from the rear of the cabin. Jedediah pointed to the back door, giving Cora a silent nod. She moved like a shadow, taking a position behind the cast-iron stove. A heavy boot kicked the back door. The iron latch groaned, but held. Another kick and the wood splintered. A massive, bearded man in a buffalo coat shoved his way inside, raising a lever-action rifle. Before he could pull the trigger, Cora stepped out from behind the stove and leveled the shotgun. The blast was deafening in the confined space. The man was thrown backward out into the snow, his rifle clattering to the floor. At the exact same moment, the front window shattered inward. A second hired gun tried to climb through the jagged glass, a revolver spitting fire blindly into the room. Wood splinters rained down on Jedediah. The mountain man didn't flinch. He rose from behind his barricade, leveled the Winchester, and fired twice. The man slumped over the windowsill, dead before he hit the floorboards. "Cora, get down!" Jedediah roared. From the tree line, Holden opened fire with a heavy buffalo rifle. The massive lead rounds punched cleanly through the cabin's thick log walls. Clay chinking exploded into dust. Jedediah hit the deck, crawling rapidly toward Cora, who was pinned behind the stove as bullets tore through the kitchen. "He's trying to pin us down," Jedediah shouted over the deafening roar of gunfire. "He's going to try and burn us out." True to Jedediah's word, through the gun smoke and shattered windows, they saw Holden rushing across the snow, carrying a lit torch of pitch pine and a bottle of kerosene. If he hit the dry cedar roof, the cabin would go up like a powder keg. "Cover me!" Jedediah yelled. Cora didn't hesitate. She stood up, resting her Schofield on the edge of the stove, and fanned the hammer, sending a hail of lead out the shattered window. The suppression fire forced Holden to duck behind a large rain barrel, dropping his torch in the snow. That was all the opening Jedediah needed. He didn't shoot from the window. Instead, he lunged to the door, ripped the wooden crossbar away, and kicked it open, charging out onto the freezing porch. Holden, surprised by the aggressive maneuver, scrambled from behind the barrel, raising his six-shooter. Holden fired first. The bullet grazed Jedediah's ribs, tearing through his thick wool coat and drawing a sharp hiss of pain, but it didn't slow his momentum. Jedediah vaulted the porch railing landing squarely on Holden. The two men crashed into the deep snow, a violent tangle of fists and steel. Holden lost his gun in the fall, but quickly drew a nasty, serrated Bowie knife. He slashed wildly, catching Jedediah across the forearm. Blood spilled bright red against the pristine white snow. Holden grinned a feral sneer of triumph as he reared back to plunge the knife into Jedediah's chest. Crack! Holden froze his eyes, going wide. He dropped the knife, his hand flying to a blossoming red stain on his shoulder. Standing on the porch, her hair wild and her eyes blazing with absolute fury, was Cora. Smoke curled from the barrel of her Schofield. Jedediah didn't waste the opportunity. He drove his heavy fist upward, connecting solidly with Holden's jaw. The corrupt lawman's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed unconscious into the snow. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ragged breathing of the mountain man and the fugitive. Jedediah slowly climbed to his feet, clutching his bleeding arm. He looked up at Cora, standing fiercely on the porch of his home, defending it like a lioness. He walked up the steps. Cora lowered the gun, her hands shaking, now that the adrenaline was fading. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice cracking as she looked at his bleeding arm. "Just a scratch," Jedediah murmured. He reached out with his good arm and pulled her against his chest. For a moment, Cora stiffened, but then she melted into his embrace, wrapping her arms tightly around his waist, burying her face in his coat. "It's over," Jedediah whispered into her hair. "We'll take his ledgers to the federal judge in Helena. With Holden and his men tied up and the evidence in hand, Montgomery's cronies will hang. You're free, Cora." Months later, the bitter winter finally surrendered to the vibrant explosion of a Montana spring. Wildflowers painted the valley in hues of violet and gold. The cabin had been repaired, the bullet holes patched, and the shattered glass replaced. Jedediah stood on the porch, a steaming mug of black coffee in his hand, watching the tree line. But he wasn't watching for wolves or bounty hunters. He was watching Toby, who was laughing hysterically as he chased a frantic barn cat through the tall grass. Sitting on a quilt nearby, Sarah was meticulously teaching Cora how to weave a flower crown out of mountain daisies. Cora looked up, catching Jedediah's eye. The bruised, terrified woman who had arrived in a freezing wagon was gone. In her place was a woman glowing with quiet strength, a woman who wore a simple gold band on her left hand. She smiled a real, luminous smile that reached her dark eyes and blew him a kiss. Jedediah McCall had placed an ad for a cook to save his children. What he got was a warrior, a partner, and a mother to his kids. The mountain had taken everything from him, but in its harsh, unforgiving way, it had given him exactly what he needed to live again. If you are captivated by this thrilling tale of survival romance and frontier justice, make sure to hit that like button. Sharing this story helps keep the spirit of the Wild West alive. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our real-life historical dramas. Drop a comment below. Would you have protected Cora? Let us know.